If the idea of going fractional feels exciting and terrifying at the same time, you're exactly where most senior women start their fractional journey. Because fractional leadership isn't usually something women plan on day one. It shows up as a quiet question, a nudge, a feeling that your experience has outgrown the shape of your current career or role. You might love parts of what you currently do and still feel underutilized. You might want more flexibility without stepping away from meaningful, high impact work. Or maybe you're already being asked, could you advise on this? And you're wondering whether that's something more intentional and sustainable you could do on the other side of that conversation. What I want to be really clear about from the start of this episode is this is not about convincing you to quit your job and become fractional today. It's not about pushing you into entrepreneurship. And it's definitely not about blowing up a career you've worked hard to build. This episode is about bringing you clarity, about understanding what fractional leadership really is about, whether it's for you, how senior women around you are using it, sometimes quietly, sometimes deliberately, to create more autonomy, impact, and alignment for them in their work. If you're curious but cautious, if you feel pulled, but also protective of what you've built, you are in exactly the right place. So let's start at the very beginning. Most of those women, fractional leaders that you know, read about, follow online, don't wake up one day and say, hey, I think I'll build a fractional portfolio career today. What usually happens is far more subtle. It starts with someone saying, could you just take a look at this? Or we'd love your perspective on something. Or you've done this before. Could you advise us? And because you're experienced, capable, generous with your thinking, you say yes. You give thoughtful input. You spot the patterns quickly. You offer clarity where things feel messy. Sometimes that turns into a one-off conversation. Sometimes it turns into a standing call. And sometimes before you've already clocked what's going on, you've become the unofficial advisor, the person people rely on when things get complex or high stakes. This shows up a lot with startups and fast-growing companies. Founders reach out because they trust your judgment, because you've been where they are now, because you can see around corners they haven't even noticed yet, because you know things about stuff that they don't, because a CEO founder can't do everything in a business. But often this work is unpaid or at least underpaid or squeezed in on the side of an already full role. Not because your contribution isn't valuable, but because it is informal. What I want you to hear clearly is this. That pull isn't accidental. It's a market signal. It is the evidence, if you need it, that your experience, your pattern recognition, your leadership judgment is in demand. And when people are asking for it for free, it's a sign that maybe you could go a step further. Even if it hasn't been formalized or valued properly, people are valuing you. And this is where many of the women who come and talk to me start to feel a little bit of tension. I'm already doing this kind of work, but I don't have the language for it. I don't have boundaries around it. I don't know how or whether to make it legitimate. Can I really replace my salary doing this without hustling all the time for roles? And this is exactly the point where curiosity meets fear. Is this allowed? Is it ethical with my current role? Am I senior enough to do this properly? What happens if someone finds out? Can I really do it? If any of those resonate, I want you to know you are not behind, you're not late, you're not naive for wondering, you haven't done anything wrong. You are at the beginning of understanding something very important about how your leadership could and should evolve. So let's address some of these questions head on, starting with what fractional leadership actually is, and just as importantly, what it isn't. So you can separate the reality from the myths and decide whether this is for you, because it's not for everybody, and that's okay. So now that we've named how many women arrive, and by the way, there's an infinite number of ways women arrive at this, we need to clear up a lot of confusion, because this is where most of us get stuck. Fractional leadership is not consulting. It's not coaching. It's not contracting yourself up for an extra few hours a week. Fractional leadership is about holding real leadership responsibility, just not on a full-time exclusive basis. You're not selling your time. Please hear this. This is an exchange of hours. Sometimes the contract will be a couple of hours a week, but what you're really selling, what you're being brought in for, it's judgment, pattern recognition, decision-making. A fractional leader is trusted because she shapes direction. She influences priorities. She guides teams through complexity, helps an organization make better decisions faster. Often at the VP or executive level, or leader of leaders level, you get brought in because you can do something that is missing elsewhere in the business you're being pulled into. This is why we feel pulled into this fractional work before we can explain what's really going on, what we're actually being asked, before we give it a name. Because it's using the thing you've built over years and years and years, your earned authority. Now that you know what it is, let's talk about what it isn't, because this really matters. Fractional leadership is not being on call all the time. It's not being everyone's spare pair of hands. It's really, really not, by the way. You should be sufficiently expensive that you are not the person that's hands-on. It's not helping out wherever is needed. Again, you're too expensive for that, because otherwise you're going to be doing IC work, and at which point you are not fractional leadership. It's not being quietly absorbing responsibility without power or without boundaries. As a fractional leader, you need to be at a sufficiently high level. You're taken very seriously. It's not being hired on a contract basis because they don't want you to make a case for being an employee. So a lot of the time, I think people become contractors because the business doesn't want to commit to an employee. But ultimately, a fractional leader, an executive fractional leader, is somebody they can't afford to bring on full time. They need your skills and expertise, but they can't afford you full time. So what they do is they make you fractional, and you do the bit that nobody else can do. They can hire a cheap IC to do a lot of the stuff that a lot of leaders in startups do. You think about an early stage startup, they hire a leader, that person does everything. A fractional leader is brought in because they have expertise that means it's too expensive to ask them to do everything. So hear this. If any of what you're doing right now resonates with what I've just said, you're not falling into a trap, you're not failing at fractional work, you're just not doing it with the right structure yet. And so if what you heard is like, okay, I do want to be that fractional person, then I want you to hear this important reframe. Fractional leadership is not a downgrade from a full-time leadership role. I think some of us think this, but it's really not. It's a different shape of leadership and career. For some of us, it's a bridge. For others, it's a portfolio alongside a full-time role. I've had clients do it as a part of an on-call career, as a career change. They don't want to work full-time, but they want to give back, and it's their zone of genius. And for some, it becomes a long-term way of working that evolves when life and priorities change around them. You don't need to decide which camp you're in today. The only thing you need to know right now is clarity. Because once you understand what fractional leadership is, you can dip your toes in. But a lot of the self-doubt starts to loosen its grip if you're like, oh, I understand that. And you're not second guessing anymore. Is this what I want? Is this for me? You can try it out as long as you know what you are trying out. Because that brings us clarity. Which brings me to something I see all the time in the work I do as a coach. When women come to me curious about fractional leadership, and I would say this happens so often, they usually fall into one of three starting points. You might hear yourself in more than one, and that's normal. There's mismatches, of course, but there's often one that feels like, oh, that's me. So let me walk you through them. The first one is the woman who's building on the side. This is the woman who's still in a full-time role, often a senior manager, director, VP level, and she's thinking, I don't want to quit. I don't want to risk my job, but I want to test what else might be possible. She might already have a former colleague asking for advice, a startup conversation bubbling in the background, a sense that her current role isn't stretching her anymore, but she's decided she doesn't want to work her way up in a full-time environment. But what holds her back isn't her capability, it's caution. She's asking, is this legal with my contract? What if my employer finds out? How do I do this without burning bridges? Do I even have time for this? For her, fractional leadership isn't about escape, it's about optionality. When it's done properly, small, safe, strategic, it can be a smart way to build confidence, visibility, and leverage without blowing up your career that you've spent decades potentially building. The second kind of woman who comes to me is the woman who's seeking impact. This woman is often brought on after a life shift. She's had parental leave, caregiving, burnout, a relocation. Something big has happened. And she's like, I'm ready to return, but I want to do something amazing. Maybe it's just simply the realization that traditional leadership is no longer fitting her life. She's deeply experienced, but she doesn't feel seen or valued in the way she once did. She's thinking, I still have so much to offer, but I'm being boxed in. I don't want the full-time trap anymore. Or this just doesn't work for who I need to be. But I really want impact. I'm not sure I trust myself to negotiate or put a price on my experience, but I know I want to make a difference. For her, fractional leadership represents something powerful. It's the chance to do that high impact, intellectually stimulating work without sacrificing her health, her family, her sense of self. What she often needs most at this stage isn't a strategy. It's confidence. It's the confidence that her experience isn't expired. It's the confidence that part-time leadership is still real leadership. The confidence that companies will pay for outcomes, not hours. By the way, they do. But then there is the third woman who typically comes to me. And as I said, with all these three, sometimes it's a mishmash of the three. The third woman is the woman who's curious about startups. She might have worked in a startup at some point in her career, but maybe right now she's moved away from it. But she loves the strategy. She hates the bureaucracy. And she is brilliant. She gets pulled into early stage conversations because she can see what founders can't. But she loves that early invention stage. She wants to participate. Maybe she's been asked to join as a co-founder and there's no pay involved, or the comp is just so far below what she's earning right now. So it's just not right for her at this point in her life to give that up and become a full-time founder. She's been advising informally, mentoring, joining just one more call. And recently she started to wonder, why am I doing this for free? Sometimes they only wonder that once they've had a conversation with me. Because I'm like, why are you doing this for free, my love? I know you're amazing, but why are we doing this for free? Why do we feel like we need to do so much for free? Men don't, by the way. Unless there's like something coming at the end of it, like equity, big chunks of equity. So sometimes we feel like this doesn't feel like real work. Is it a real role? She might have been offered equity, but without context and without knowing, is this a viable enterprise? But always be careful about taking equity without having a say in the actual outcome. Founders are different because they get a genuine say in how successful the business will be. Equity for early stage startups, for anybody other than founders who have a real say, it's a huge risk because so many other people are required to make the thing successful. So she's been asked to stay involved, but there's no clear scope. She's noticed peers quietly making real money from similar work and wondering why she's not. What she needs is some more opportunities. It's structure, pricing, uncomfortable one there, and boundaries. Fractional leadership gives us a way to turn that informal influence into intentional paid impact without being exploited or pulled into the chaos. If any of those three women felt uncomfortably familiar, that's not coincidence. Each of these is a starting point with real fears about legality, stability, time, and your worth. So let's talk about those fears directly, not to dismiss them, but to separate what's real from what's just unexamined anxiety, because that's where we figure things out and get much clearer. At this point in a conversation with somebody, this is where things tighten. Because once we feel that fractional leadership is possible, the fears bubble up. They're rarely abstract. They feel very real, very practical, very human. So let's just deal with a few of them up front right here, right now. Is this even legal or ethical with my current job? This is number one for so many of us, especially if you're building on the side of your current job. And it's a smart question, not a limiting question. It's a good question to answer. The answer is rarely you can't do fractional work. It's usually about how you do it, avoiding direct competitors, being clear on scope, separating time, tools, obligations, understanding what your contract actually says, not what you assume it says. Go read it. Go get somebody to look at it who knows contract wording, okay? Most women don't need to stop exploring fractional work. They need to clarify the boundaries, not secrecy or stress. Fear number 2 is, what if I don't have the time? Again, so legit. It shows up for all of us, but especially women when we are carrying so much, which might be the very reason why fractional is appealing to you. Here's a reframe that you need to hear. Fractional leadership done badly is exhausting. Let me just admit that. But fractional leadership done well is focused and gives you time back, gives you energy back. It isn't about squeezing more into your life. It's actually about working at the right altitude, fewer hours, higher leverage, and with very, very clear boundaries. If you're already exhausted, the answer isn't do more, it's do differently. This applies, by the way, outside fractional too. If you're exhausted, we need to have a chat for other reasons, not about whether or not you want fractional. It's about getting that under control before you do anything else. Fear number 3. This fear comes up so much with women who are seeking to make an impact, particularly those with families, caregiving responsibilities. They crave that impact piece, but the stability question, well, it deserves your respect. Because fractional work feels scary, but let me tell you this, it is not recklessness. It's about diversification. Instead of one employer holding all the power over your career, which might lay you off, might go through an M&A and be taken for granted, or demoted, that's happening a lot at the moment in M&As. Instead, you spread the risk across multiple clients, defined time horizons, clear value exchange. For many of us, that feels more stable once we actually figure out what that looks like, not less. You do have to trust that you can sell your skill set, but that will come. I can tell you that I didn't like selling my skills at all when I started. And, these days I'm not afraid to sell my skills. I know that I can deliver great outcomes for people. So if you've managed to land a job at any point in the past, which, you're all here because you've got jobs, right? You can sell yourself as a fractional leader. You can get fractional gigs. So the stability is about how you set it up and a choice. Okay, next fear number 4. I'm not senior enough to do this. This one's quiet but pervasive. I have a lot of women that come to me who are middle management, but in a big company. They're interested in going to a startup, but startups won't compensate them. So actually going from middle management in big corporate to a startup executive fractional makes a lot of sense. So actually, I would say the truth is fractional leadership is not about your job title. It's about whether people already trust your judgment. If people are asking for your advice, if you're shaping decisions behind the scenes, if you're the one people turn to when things get messy, you're more likely ready than you think. Remember what I said at the beginning, market signals. If you're getting signals from the market, you're more than ready. And the final fear, I'm scared to price myself. Okay, I don't want to talk about pricing here. That's not the point of today's episode. That's a whole episode in its own right. But this fear stops so many of us before we even get going because pricing feels icky. But here's the deal. Pricing leadership isn't about confidence. It's about clarity. It's about knowing what your offer is. When your offer is vague, pricing feels terrifying. When your scope is clear, outcomes are defined, pricing becomes grounded, and there's a clear value proposition. Most of us underprice and we undersell ourselves in negotiation for jobs too, because we lack the definition of the value we are bringing to the table. We underprice because we haven't been taught how to structure that kind of negotiation. That is entirely fixable. None of those fears mean that fractional leadership isn't for you. They mean you're asking questions, taking yourself seriously, and there's work to do to clarify it. The fears are not the reason not to go forward. The fears are a reason to go forward with intention. And that's exactly what you do as a great leader. You move forward with intention through the ambiguity to get clarity. So identify your fears, absolutely, but don't let them hold you back. Hold back because you don't want to be a fractional leader rather than because of fear of saying, oh, what if? Which brings us to the part most of us skip and why so many fractional experiments fail. Here's the hard truth. Most people who say fractional work didn't work for them weren't actually doing fractional leadership in my experience. They were doing advising, part-time execution, they were glorified IC, they were being helpful without authority. They were really a full-time employee paid as a consultant, dressed up as some sort of fractional gig to make them feel better. That is not sustainable for anyone. Fractional leadership only works when 4 things are in place. Firstly, a clear offer, not a long list of everything you can do, a clear statement, the problem you help solve, the outcomes you're responsible for, the level you're operating at, and what shifts from extra help to strategic partner needs to be clarified. The second thing that needs to be in place is a defined scope, boundaries, what's included, what's not, how decisions get made, where your authority starts and stops. Without scope, fractional work becomes invisible labor. With scope, it's leadership, strategy, delivery of things that really matter. The third thing that needs to be in place is boundaries. Your boundaries. This just applies for every leadership role, but it's so important fractionally. I know you're generous. I know you're extremely capable. You're used to being the glue that holds everything together. Fractional leadership requires to protect your time, make decisions right, and set very clear expectations. Not because you're difficult, but because leadership needs space to be effective. And the fourth piece that needs to be in place is a clear 90-day timeframe. It's a huge, big block. When we can define our time horizons, we will be successful. A good 90-day frame gives us confidence, gives the client confidence, gives you leverage, prevents endless drifting engagement. It makes fractional work feel testable for both sides. You're not signing up forever, you're committing to impact. When you have all four elements, fractional work feels focused, respected, energizing, genuinely powerful. But if any of them are missing, you will be exhausted. You will likely be underpaid. Things will feel unclear and you will be emotionally drained. And that's when people come to me saying, yeah, I tried fractional, it doesn't work for me. This is where you need to realize this is not about more courage. It's about structure. Okay. One of the most damaging myths, though, is that you have to make some sort of dramatic leap. You have to quit your job. You have to go all in. Figure it out as you go somehow. That story might work for some people, but it's not the only path. And it's rarely the smartest one for us as women with real responsibilities, reputations, and careers we spent years building. Fractional leadership is scalable. So that means it can start as one clearly scoped client, one 90-day engagement, one opportunity sourced from your existing network. Just as a rough estimate, I'd say about a quarter to a third of my executive coaching clients who have full-time jobs have some sort of consulting on the side that is actually a fractional role. That some of them are considering this as the thing they're going to do ultimately. Some of them are dabbling, testing it out. You don't need to announce this publicly. You don't need a website. You don't need to decide today where this leads. For some, this is a portfolio layer alongside long-time full-time role. For others, it's a bridge, a way to test entrepreneurship with training wheels and safety nets. And for some, it becomes the thing you work towards so you have flex with life, fulfills your ambition in a particular way, and fulfills your energy. What matters is not speed, it's intentionality. You're not trying to escape your career, you're expanding it. And when you approach fractional leadership with that mindset, thoughtfully, strategically, on your own terms, it stops feeling risky and starts feeling, well, grounded. Which brings me to the most important question of all. Should I quit my job? Or even, should I go fractional? The real question is, what do I want to explore next and how do I do that safely? You don't need to have all your answers today. You need to decide if you want to explore it. That's the only answer. Do I explore this? You don't need to know what 5 years looks like. Don't get me wrong, I'm a big fan of a 5-year plan, but I'm a big fan of having multiple 5-year plans so you can see what the options are depending on any short-term decisions you've got to make that you aren't ready to make yet. But if this episode stirred something inside you, curiosity, relief, recognition, clarity in some way, that is worth paying attention to. And if you'd like to talk that through with someone who understands the realities of senior leadership, portfolio careers, and the unique pressures that we face as women at this stage, I'd love to help. Every month, I offer a limited number of strategy calls to women in tech, where we can look at whether fractional leadership makes sense for you, what a safe, ethical starting point could look like, and how to explore your options without putting your current role at risk. There's no pitch, there's no pressure, just a grounded conversation about what's possible. Now, if you've enjoyed today's episode, please do like, subscribe, share this with somebody who you think needs to hear it. And if you could leave a rating review on your podcast platform or a comment on YouTube, that really helps the algorithm and just gets us in front of more people. I would really, really appreciate it. But remember, whatever you decide, your experience is not something you have to escape from. It's something you can build with. You are allowed to design a career that fits the life you actually want, not what other people think you should want. Until next time, keep being awesome. And remember, you don't need to make a decision today. You just need to decide whether or not you want to get some clarity tomorrow.